Okay, so I hope you took a few minutes to answer these questions. When I look at them, I think the only one that might stump you was never number three. So if you like skip that, that's cool. But the other three, you should be able to take what I gave you and answer them. So let's just go ahead and get started. First question says, what is the value of A? Well, that's obvious. You've got to remember that the value of A is the coefficient with the x squared. So you have two values of A here because you have two functions. So you should have two answers for number one. Your value of A is 1/4 and -4. So hopefully you wrote that down, but I know there's a few of y'all lazy lima beans that just went ahead and pressed play and didn't write anything down because you want me to do all the thinking for you. So there's your answer if you didn't bother to try to think and write it down. 1/4 and -4. Now, number two says, which direction would each graph open? Well, that's determined by the sign. That's what you wrote in the box a few minutes ago. You have a positive number and a negative number. At this case, I don't care what the numbers are. I'm just focusing on the sign. So the first function, because that's a positive number, the y equals 1/4 x squared will open up. Right? So I'm just matching those two. And then the y equals -4x squared will open down. How do I know? I looked at the sign. I don't need to graph it. I don't need an XY table. I just need to know what the role of A tells me. Okay, so that's question number two. Now, let's get question number three and go to question number four. We'll come back to three because we got to talk about that a little bit. Question number four says, which graph is wider? Well, I just wrote down in the last video that the smaller your number, the wider it is. Doesn't matter which one is negative. The smaller the number, the wider your graph. So if you look at your two functions, clearly you have a fraction here, so that will give you the wider graph. So which graph is wider? The one that has 1/4 x squared. Okay, so you should have at least been able to answer three of the questions. Let's go back to question number three. Now this takes you back to the front page where I gave you the definition of a vertex. I told you that the vertex is the highest or lowest point on your parabola. It's the highest or lowest point. All right, so go ahead and you've got some room there. If I gave you a parabola facing up this way, the lowest point would be right here. This is my vertex. This is the lowest point. Now think about it. If this is the lowest point and all of the other points are higher than that, would this vertex have a y-coordinate that's a min or the max? Now think about it. It's the lowest point. So your y-coordinate would be a minimum. The y-coordinate would be a minimum. Okay, the y-coordinate would be a min because you're at the lowest point. Okay, so they kind of go hand in hand. Let's just try some common sense. It works. Common sense works. All right, so that's the lowest point here. Right? So which one of those functions did I just sketch? The first one or the second one? Hopefully you said the first one because the first one has a positive A. So this would be y equals 1/4 x squared. Your vertex is at the lowest point. Then you would answer minimum. Not minute, minimum. All right? The second graph, you're looking at it. It's got a negative A. So I know that my graph is going to be down. So where would your vertex be? Up at the top. That's your highest point of the parabola. And guess what? If that's the highest point, that means that y-coordinate is at the maximum. That's the highest y-coordinate you will have before it starts falling down. So your y-coordinate is a maximum. That's the largest y-coordinate you have. So if I ask you that question, your best bet would be to use a little common sense about what's going on with your graph. But you may have noticed a few weeks ago I had one of my quotes of the week. Common sense is not always common. But if you use it, if you can find it, That'll help you answer this question. You're going to be asked these type of questions on the mastery check on the test, so be prepared to know what your role of A is. Next video, we're going to talk about what your role of